Okay, hello again, and welcome to the Marketplace Risk virtual event series. My name is Martina Matthews, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Success at Marketplace Risk. Today, we welcome team members from Checker Trust, Sittercity, Sift, and Hulah to present on building fair and inclusive safety measures to increase trust and revenue. Our virtual events are designed to help marketplaces and digital platforms with trust and safety, risk, compliance, and legal issues so they can focus on launching and scaling successfully. Be sure to check out marketplacerisk.com to sign on for our newsletter subscription and to view recordings from past conferences and on-demand events. You'll also be able to stay up to date on everything around the 2024 Marketplace Risk Management Conference in San Francisco in May and our Global Summit in London in November. Before we get started, we have a bit of housekeeping. This event is being recorded and will be available on demand on the website. All attendees are able to submit questions in chat. At this time, we'll hand over the mic to today's speakers. Nice, over to you.
Thank you, Martina. Excited to be here and to speak with our awesome panelists about the topic of fair and inclusive safety measures. Let's go ahead and do a quick review of our agenda. We'll be sure to do some quick intros, and then we'll really start to dive into the topic of fair and inclusive safety measures, really talk about what this concept means, how to think about it, some frameworks. We'll hear from each of the panelists how they're thinking about it, and then we'll dive into some practical applications and best practices and really hear how each company has really thought about fairness and safety in the design of their product. We'll also then take time for some Q&A before wrapping up. So let's run forward into introductions. My name is Nice Zhang. I am on the Checker Trust team, leading our new products group. Checker Trust is a sub-brand within Checker who's focused on creating safer communities and marketplaces by providing an instantaneous, scalable, and cost-effective screening solution. I'll now hand it off to the other speakers to share a quick intro, their name, company, and why this topic is meaningful to them. So Heather, I'll kick it off to you.
Hi, I'm Heather, and I'm the CEO and founder of Hulah, which is a dating app where every guy has to be endorsed or background checked by a woman to join. And we're all about making things safer for women especially, and bringing in better guys. So definitely with background checks and yeah, we obviously that's very important to us, keeping the space very safe.
Fantastic. And Chelsea?
Yeah, I'm Chelsea Hauer, the Director of Trust and Safety for Sittercity. I oversee the development and maintenance of the Trust and Safety program, compliance, and I've recently started working with the information security team there. I started the Trust and Safety team at Sittercity about 7 years ago and have absorbed a lot of information over the years. This is a topic that I am very passionate about and bring up consistently as we develop our product. So I'm super excited to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chelsea. And then we have Kevin. Kevin, if you could give a quick intro about yourself and tell us why this topic is meaningful to you.
Hi there, everybody. Apologies for the kind of audio issues. So my name is Kevin. I lead our Trust and Safety Architect team here at Sift. If you're not familiar with Sift, we are a AI and machine learning platform that helps businesses protect themselves and their consumers and their users against various forms of abuse. Prior to joining Sift, I led my own fraud, chargebacks, spam, trust and safety teams at companies like Google and Facebook and Square. And so pleasure to be here today. One of the reasons why this topic is so kind of close and near and dear to me is just because I do see a seismic shift here with regards to marketplaces, and this new model is kind of taking over. There is a lot of decentralization happening here, and in that regards, knowing who to trust, what businesses or micro businesses who to trust becomes even more paramount. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So super excited about hearing from different perspectives today. So let's go ahead and dive into the topic of what fair and inclusive safety measures really means. So to really dive in, there's not a guidebook or industry standard, and the landscape is shifting, as folks have mentioned, for how to keep platforms and users safe. We're really advocating for fairness and inclusion to be key principles when thinking about safety measures. The reality is 1 in 3 Americans have some sort of record, and it doesn't make sense to indiscriminately include that much of the population. So fair and inclusive safety is the idea that the screening process should aim to screen people in rather than screen people out. There should be a lot of nuance, and only relevant information should be considered. When done right, the result is more participation, more revenue opportunities, and ultimately a better user experience. So some key themes to really keep in mind as important principles for fair and inclusive safety. First is being human-centered. There should be nuance, as we mentioned, when considering screening factors, with considerations for things like recency and severity. Being prepared and really anticipating. Thoughtful policy, or protocol around fairness and inclusion really enables premeditated courses versus that give you more time to really think things through versus having knee-jerk reactions to situations that may occur on your platform or community. And finally, being adaptable. Flexibility and a dynamic approach makes sure that you can incorporate learnings to strengthen fair and inclusive safety measures. There may be situations that haven't been anticipated before, or as platforms change and grow, there may be opportunities to adapt. So to pause there, those are some of the key themes. I'd love to hear from the panelists. What else comes to mind for you when you're thinking about fairness and inclusion in your safety measures? I'll kick it off to Chelsea to start.
Yeah, I think this is really the perfect framework to think through these key ideas here. As we continue to learn about safety and inclusion, we're consistently needing to adjust. An example I'll give is historically, we've seen that laws that were created affect certain demographic populations more than others. And as you mentioned, many folks have some type of a record because of that. And now that we're starting to see that, we can work to figure out ways to help increase opportunities for those folks who might get flagged because they were at a certain disadvantage. Things like this are just really going to continue to develop as we grow and learn as a society, and being ready for those developments will just become more and more important. And, as you continue to develop these updates, they'll just need to be well thought out to help prevent unintended bias or consequences. Like obviously at Sittercity, we work with children. It's a super vulnerable population. So it gets hard when we're wanting to afford these types of opportunities for people. But I think that the consistency and communication is just going to be really important for that.
Absolutely. I love how you really spoke to the human-centered element of the children being at the center of the population, and really thinking about folks from the standpoint of unintentional bias or consequence as well. Maybe I'll kick it over to Heather, and would love to hear as well from you how you think about fairness and inclusion when it pertains to your safety measures.
Yeah. Something that really stood out to me is when you say screen in. I think that's really important, the way that we speak about this. So, but I would say it really depends on the nature of the business. And I would say for us, for example, a traffic violation might not have as much weight on a background check than something like sexual assault. These things, I think, depending on the business, they have different weights. And so I think it's then, really diving in as a business and figuring out where you stand on certain things. And especially for us, being that we facilitate intimate relationships, I think we definitely we have certain rule and categories that we will be more bullish on and not. But I do agree it's important to also, just like Chelsea said, there is populations that are more vulnerable to certain crimes. So I think that just having empathy also is an important quality to have as a business. And then, of course, if you do classify someone or if you do fail on the background check side, having an appeal and a way to communicate with that person and dive deeper into the case and figure out what actually happened. So I think that's also an important part of the process.
Yeah, I love that. I think you really touched a lot on the aspects of nuance as well. Like it's not, policy is more than just kind of, this is a one and done. There's a lot of empathy or different situations which might occur. And there's a lot of ways to really think about being adaptable to those different cases and really putting the humans first. Kevin, I would love to hear from you as well about what are some of the key tenets or the key frameworks that you think about when it comes to fairness and inclusion.
Yeah, of course. And typically when I work with different marketplaces, the keywords that come to mind when it comes to fairness and inclusion, number one is transparency. So let's say the knock on AI and machine learning historically has been it's a black box. And really creating a structure and policies that are transparent internally and depending on how externally you want to be with regards to why someone did not pass. That's a conversation that many businesses wrestle with, even internally between, let's say, the product team or the legal team or the customer success team. How much can you disclose internally and externally to, let's say, the user that's trying to sign up for the platform? The other keyword for me that comes to mind is accountability. So who is responsible for what and what role do they play? Typically, I've seen it go sideways a bit where there's no accountability and then people blame, let's say, point fingers at the model or the policy. But unless there's clear accountability, it's difficult to make change and improve upon that. And then really the last one I'll bring up is like, although we should absolutely build programs and policies that are human-centered, I think one area that many marketplaces deal with and kind of grapple with today is around how do you scale and automate as much as possible. So coming from Facebook, for example, where we had like tens of thousands of content moderators all around the world doing content moderation to make sure that the platform was as secure as possible. But even that wasn't enough based on how much content was being posted. And so scale and automation are also kind of a key pillar there in terms of creating this inclusive and safe environment.
Absolutely. I love the additional points you brought up and also the contrast that you mentioned in terms of what happens when marketplaces scale. So these were some really great thought starters. And I think I love the different angles that everyone's been able to bring in. Let's move forward to the next slide and we'll kind of get a little bit deeper about where to get started. I'll kind of talk through the slide a little bit and then again, love to hear from the speakers and hear how this aligns with different practices that they've put into place. So aligning with, now that we've really talked a little bit more about the principles, let's talk about the ways and the different measures that companies can take to make this a reality. So part of our offering at Checker Trust is a consultative approach, meaning we work closely with our customers to understand their specific problems and how to best use our data signals and products. As part of that, we really think about 3 primary jobs that trust and safety measures do for us. So the first is alignment with mission and values. You've already heard, and I think everyone's really spoken to each company having their own brand, product, community, environment, industry, size, scale, and they really want to foster these and take all of these into context when connecting their trust and safety approach with their company situation. And so connecting fairness and inclusion to your distinct mission and values really is important to make sure that internal stakeholders are on the same page and really incorporating these principles at the core of your business. And this foundational step is really critical in achieving alignment and buy-in. Then I think as folks have spoken to, really building the policy and having the emphasis on being prepared and creating well-designed policy to be able to enact that fair and inclusive safety. So policy aspects may include deciding what signals, data, behavior, and information is relevant for safety on your platform. I think Heather mentioned the case of driving records, which is less relevant for her platform, and that might not be for other cases as well, but could be really relevant when thinking about a different use case, such as car sharing. Defining how this policy impacts your customers, as we've talked about, and educating your team internally to understand what the policy is looking to achieve. So there is that alignment about how to handle cases which may arise. And then finally, assessing and adapting. This means being flexible so you can make room to respond and adjust policy to include new or unanticipated situations. Realistically, the principles of fairness and inclusivity will not perfectly address every single scenario that may occur. And so it's important to assess whether policy is working in the given context and be able to adapt or optimize to the needs of your business. So kind of with that being said, I think we've touched on a lot of themes that we've already heard, but would just love to hear from the panelists. Are there any additional examples that are kind of core to the way you think about enacting safety measures? Do all three of these buckets resonate? And I'll kind of welcome whoever wants to speak first.
So I think definitely all three matter. One, for us, we really want to make things especially safer for women. And so we are probably going to take a more aggressive approach on certain categories than maybe some other apps that exist. And then, of course, that's all, we have reasons that we've built this sort of inclusion protocol around. And then obviously that's where the appeal comes into play. And if there is something that we made the mistake on, or that there is more context behind that the person can provide, and then we can definitely assess that further. And then I think also for us, like the time, the date of the record matters for us particularly too. So we also believe that people can change and can become better people at certain points, depending on the category. There's certain categories that sort of time frame in between, like if it was 10 years ago that this happened, that's going to hold less weight for us. So I think also building protocol around, can people change is another question, depending on the business.
That sounds like a tough one in terms of can people change and kind of how to make those judgment calls. Certainly from my end, certainly building policies is important. And something I stress with a lot of the teams I work with is remembering the policy versus the practice. And it's tough to come up with a policy for everything. Typically, before you go pre-launch, before you launch, you have a trust and safety team integrated early on, so they can think through all the different use cases that are out there. That being said, post-launch, there's going to be some unknown unknowns, and things are going to test your policies. And frankly, there may not be a rule created for it just because, hey, we didn't think of it. In that case, it's really important to align on that mission and those values, and what is that North Star, and that'll help guide people internally on what decision to ultimately make. That being said, it's also really important to have and set up some sort of escalation path when there is a mistake, frankly. I remember when I was at Facebook, if you're in the news feed, for example, there are strict policies around nudity. And there was an image, there's a very famous image of the Vietnam War. It's called the Napalm Girl. And it is a picture of a minor. She is nude. And it is a well-known photograph from that time period. And the policy was, hey, no nudity, especially when it comes to minors. And the image was taken down per policy. But ultimately, there's nuances here, right, in terms of how to act on that, what the escalation looks like. Luckily, we were able to respond to it quickly and then adapt to it. But that was just one example where the policy is nuanced, and having that clarity of like, okay, what does this particular post mean? What type of exposure is it going to get? Can help guide where you want to go with that particular action. The last thing I'll mention there is around just explainability and really the ability to measure false positives. So the systems and the policies that we set up, they're not going to be perfect. There are things that are going to happen where there are going to be customer insults or false positives. So I think it was Heather mentioned the ability to appeal and what that process looks like. Measuring that data consistently will also help in terms of when you get started, having that built into the process can certainly be a good leg up when it comes to formulating your strategy.
Yeah, a lot of what Kevin and Heather mentioned really resonate with the way that we think about it at Sittercity as well. The childcare space can be difficult because, again, you're working with that vulnerable population. And I think, Heather mentioned an aggressive approach, which historically Sittercity has had. An example that I can give is that historically, if you have any felony or misdemeanor record present on your background check, that makes you ineligible for membership. You get removed from the platform. You can't use the platform. Obviously we have certain dispute processes in place from a legality perspective, but there's no dispute process around our policy. But as we are growing and learning, we're finding that this kind of policy might not be the best any longer, knowing what we know and how people are impacted. So, there's been discussions around, do we want to allow certain types of records within a certain time frame to remain on the platform, those folks to remain on the platform? And I think, kind of to what Kevin spoke earlier, I believe that as long as you're very transparent with your users and you're really getting into the face of your customer base to let them know exactly what you're doing and how this process works, allowing them to make these decisions for what's best for them and their family and their children, moving in that direction of adjusting these kinds of policies does create, to some extent, a little bit more risk, but you can help mitigate that with educational opportunities and that transparency. And I would say too, over the last few years, we've continually developed more transparent practices and educational opportunities for our members. It's something that I've really hyper-focused on as I've built the trust and safety team and our policies within the product.
I think that those are some awesome points. And a couple of things that really stood out to me is first, how much you can almost like describe this process as like a linear one, right? You like align with your mission and values, and you build your policy and you assess and adapt, but it just like kind of goes in and out, right? You come up with probably a case that you weren't expecting. As Kevin mentioned, right? You launch, you build what you think is a great policy, something comes up, and then the case does maybe even force you to rethink, oh, did we design that policy in the most optimal way? And ultimately, are we thinking about the connection to our mission and values in the right way? Should we actually even consider things, to your point, Chelsea, such as increasing transparency? Maybe the team took an initial approach, but we've learned something new. So I really liked that. And I also love the way that you all spoke about the fact that trust and safety and policy will never be perfect. So part of the design is having things like escalation paths. It is having things like, disputes or opening up. I think opening up and being open to having more discussion is actually a really great inclusivity measure, because it's saying, hey, this is where we've started, but it doesn't mean that we won't consider more situations. So yeah, I would love to hear if there's any additional points that this sparked for any of the speakers, or. Cool. If not, is there something you want to chime in on, Kevin?
Nope, good on mine.
Okay, cool. Then let's jump in, I think, to the next slide. I think we've touched a little bit on this as well already, but want to really highlight the fact that thinking about fairness and inclusion is there might be challenges, and there is an organization and customers to navigate. So going beyond just defining what fairness inclusion means, really getting it put into practice can absolutely present some challenges. So some of the things that we see that teams may face is, firstly, getting buy-in. Focusing on fairness and inclusion may require a shift in certain established practices or assumptions within the company, which could face resistance. This goes back to the missions and values alignment being critical, but also having key champions or making sure that there's that sponsorship for this type of work. Time and resource investment. Early on, it may take longer and more time or work up front to establish policies and solutions. But I think as we've been hearing through other examples as well, as companies scale, new situation arises and your user base grows, trust and safety advocates need to take an active role in making sure there's consistent investment to address changing needs. From a training perspective, there might be additional training needed, not just for trust and safety departments, but across the whole company, which to make sure everyone's on the same page about fairness and inclusion. This could include product teams who may not always understand trust and safety deeply enough, and they typically spend the most time thinking about flows that impact the most users. And it's really important to really think of this as a cross-functional effort. The alignment, as we mentioned, between policy, various teams, policy, legal, PR, detection, product marketing, UX. I think there's a lot of different perspectives that come into play when thinking about the holistic user experience and safety policies. And then ultimately, how does this impact your user experience? Top-notch trust and safety experiences shouldn't compromise user experience, but I think there's oftentimes trade-offs or different situations to consider and really thinking about the design of how safety practices are put into play. So I'd love to hear from our speakers. What additional advice do you have for our attendees when it comes to navigating challenges when it comes to fair and inclusive safety practices?
I can take an initial crack at this one. Really from like you have it listed here on gaining buy-in, one of the consistent challenges that I think many companies face is that we just want to grow and build the product as quickly as possible. And they don't necessarily think of all the downstream negative repercussions. And I mean, this might seem like a duh thing to say, but no product manager, no company wants to build a platform that is going to get abused by folks that we don't want on the system. But they don't always think about those corner cases as much as, let's say, a dedicated trust and safety team might. And not all companies, frankly, have a trust and safety team from the onset. So I'd say it's a luxury in many cases to have such a team or a focus area for a lot of different companies. The advice that I would give to businesses that are looking to make that not necessarily trade-off here, but they're of course, they want to grow, they want to build something for their users, they probably want to make revenue as well. But it's important to build in those safeguards where there's a difference between building in safeguards and then deploying them, where a lot of product managers, let's say, might get spooked is if the fraud team or the trust and safety team wants to put up all these barriers. And it's like, geez, how are we going to grow with all these things in place? And I think something that Nice brought up, where it's not really about diminishing or reducing the growth. It's actually, if trust and safety is rolled out properly, you can frankly enhance the experience of the users on the platform. And based on the quality of that data, you can have a larger platform or folks to go after or to have engagement on that platform. And so one key there is really don't think that you need to deploy all the policies on day one, but look to build the infrastructure where you can dynamically initiate those policies when needed. And in that case, I mean, I'll also make the assumption that, hey, 99+% of the population that's engaging on our platforms, they're legitimate. They just want to go from point A to point B, or they want to meet someone, or they want to find quality childcare. 99+% of people, like, they legitimately want to do that, and we should make it happen for them. There is that sub 1% that might do some potential harm. And that's really where we want to build in the safeguard, but only really target the safeguard for those people. The rest of the population, what are the things that we can do to create the best experience possible for them? So that's kind of guidance number one there. And really, even if you can't get that from, let's say, a trust and safety standpoint, the argument I would kind of present is, okay, cross-functional team, or okay, C-level suite, what sort of KPIs do we want to measure to put in place to say, okay, when it gets above this level, we're going to need to think about more critically around what sort of trust and safety measures we want to deploy. So we won't deploy anything today, but what KPIs do we want to measure to say after it crosses this barrier, that's really when we want to engage. So I hope that made sense to folks.
Yeah, I think those were some really great points, I think speaking to the fact that like the main goal of the business generally is to build a thriving community, regardless of what industry you're in. And you want that 99% of people, as you mentioned, to have an amazing experience. And if you think about the trade-off, like you don't want their experience to be diminished by the small percent of bad actors. And I love the creative ways that you've brought in about, hey, if folks aren't ready to deploy certain things, well, there's always preparation or even monitoring what's happening and just anticipating certain situations and just having almost playbook or preparation. So it's not kind of starting from scratch. Yeah, Chelsea or Heather, would love you to hop in on this one as well.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think something that Kevin called out that really stuck with me was the team seeing barriers. Because I would say I've faced probably every single one of these challenges over the years of building the trust and safety team at Sittercity. But I would say cross-functional alignment and then gaining buy-in have been my biggest challenges. So what I've done is really pushed my way into a lot of cross-functional meetings. When I first started about 8 years ago, there was no dedicated trust and safety team. And then after about a year, I helped to develop this separate team and just kind of have been voicing trust and safety cross-functionally ever since. So I just took it upon myself to know who was in charge of what and just to kind of keep poking at those folks, asking what was being developed or looked at or worked on. Every company needs cross-functional efforts involving trust and safety. I have repeatedly said to the entire Sittercity team, if you don't think it involves a trust and safety perspective, it does. And then, also presenting scenarios when you're working through a new product policy or even revisiting an existing product or policy. Even if these scenarios are really odd, if they could happen due to what we're looking at, it's just really important for the team to know and understand that. So just making sure, I think kind of like Kevin said, maybe not saying we have to do all these things right now, but here are the things that could arise because of XYZ. We should really be monitoring this if we're not going to deploy these solutions immediately. And if we're seeing an influx of, these events having an impact, then maybe we should try something else. And then kind of also speaking to the data, the gaining that buy-in, I think in the trust and safety space, data can be really hard to present, just because inherently a lot of what we bring to the table doesn't necessarily have hard data associated with it. But typically you can find a way to show how a policy might affect trust or ROI. Research and customer satisfaction surveys are huge resources to look at if you're seeing, for example, Sittercity has an annual trust and safety research process that we do with our users directly every year, just to give them a voice and let them tell us what they're concerned about, how they view our practices and policies, what they think this means or looks like. And then it gives us the opportunity to create adjustments and updates as needed to adjust to the way the landscape is changing. But once you get in, it's really great. And I think the key thing is just to remain flexible, make sure you're offering solutions for the problems that you're bringing and following up consistently with the other teams.
That's fantastic. I love the examples that you brought up. And I think data, to your point, isn't always just like a giant user growth chart or some sort of sophisticated analysis, but that research, the customer sentiment, their satisfaction, their perception of the brand and trust, I think is absolutely super important. Heather, I'd love to hear if any of these challenges resonate with you, or if you have any others that you've come across.
Yeah, for us, safety is the huge why of why we exist. So, our job is to really create the best foundation for keeping things safe. And so to us, it was less having to get people to buy into that. Like my team, we're all for it, whatever we can do to make we're just like whatever we can do. So for us, that's a core part of the user experience, that you can go on Hulah and there's gonna be better guys and women feel safe and taken care of, and we're really paying attention to all that. So I can't speak to as much the difficulties of gaining buy-in because I know that that's such at the heart of our business. Time and resource, I think yeah, I think all these things, especially with our particular business, is just, it's such a heart of our brand that we don't like to cut corners on it, and it's not hard to get us bought in.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we talked about the challenges in a great amount of deals. So let's now dive into some of the practical applications and best practices. So I think each of the speakers will speak to some specific examples of how they're applying fair and inclusive safety measures into their communities and marketplaces. So Chelsea, I will kick it over to you.
Thank you, nice. Yeah, so, at at Sittercity, our internal mission statement, for the trust and safety team, is, posted here. I won't read it to you. But this is what we look at when we develop, or look into developing policy, and process. And as we enter into, any cross-functional communications that we have. I wanted to bring some current topics that are related to inclusion and safety, and those would be these 4 bullet points here. So photos is one of them. We are currently looking at when and where to present photos. We understand that photos can cause bias, which could create kind of a blocker for people who might not understand technology or have some kind of ailment they wish not to display. And then obviously there's the subconscious bias that could present as users are navigating the platform. But we also understand that photos can be a major part of safety. You're meeting strangers on the internet, and knowing what someone looks like when you're going to meet them or going into their home is very important. So we're trying to understand, what can we do to appease both sides of this process. And I think a major part of it is looking at when to display the photos, perhaps after a conversation has begun, and then, you're focusing more on the topic at hand, which is the information in the job posting that you're applying to, or the information on a Sitter profile, and looking at those key points of what really matters for your family. And then our community effort. So in addition to our internal screening process, we have created easy ways for users to report content or exchanges that might be offensive or discriminatory. It's just really important for the community to know they play a part in this effort, and we're here to support them. We're all working together to create a safe platform for families to find childcare and for sitters to find work. And although, we can do all of these screenings internally, it's important for our community to watch out for things as well and report it to us as they see fit. And then our dedicated trust and safety team addresses any concerns that come through directly. Parent screenings is another thing that we've been looking at. A topic that was brought up on a separate webinar that I participated in was screening both sides of the marketplace. I think historically the supply side has been screened more extensively, but as we learn more about the community, we come to understand that it's important to screen both sides of the marketplace. So we currently do a handful of screenings for parents who join the platform. But there's been additional discussions around adding more screenings in because although the sitters are the ones working with the more vulnerable populations, which at this point is why they're screened a little more rigorously, they're still going into a stranger's home and they're working with someone that they've never met before most of the time. And so it just helps to create greater equity among our users and a safer environment. And then profile presentation. There's a lot of topics around how somebody's profile should be presented. A couple examples are user names. And as I spoke about before, photos. We've learned that displaying a username can inadvertently lead to subconscious bias for certain communities and can be damaging and or dangerous. So we're at a crosshairs where we need to use information that's legally registered with the government in order to process screenings appropriately. But for certain users, and I'll use, for example, those in the trans community, forcing them to display a dead name can be harmful. So there's other scenarios where there's also some, other scenarios where some users may not wish to display their real name, even if it's just a first name, last initial. And since we're a public site, we just need to be mindful of these concerns coming from our users. So, could there be a solution where someone could post a public facing nickname or alias, and then their legal identity is maintained for screening purposes, just to make sure, we are being inclusive and understanding of these other things that we know about in the background. And, I just wanted to give my key takeaway from everything discussed here, which is education and transparency for your users is really key. Cross-functional communications are necessary. If you don't have those cross-functional communications, it just doesn't work. And then problem-solving approach with solutions is paramount. If you're coming to the table with a problem that is potentially being created, bringing a solution is super important as well. And if you don't, I'm a processor, my team knows that. If you don't know a solution immediately, you can say, this is a potential problem. I'm happy to work with everybody on how we could potentially mitigate that in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love the learnings that you've been able to get through some of these different initiatives. And I think it really also highlights that even though you guys have a really strong trust and safety team and approach, there's still a lot of different matters that are continuing to come up, and all of that iteration and continual improvement to really think creating the most safe and inclusive product. So thank you for sharing. I'll pass it over to Heather. And Heather, I think you're on mute.
There we go. So as I mentioned, Hulah is a dating app where every guy has to be endorsed by a woman or background check now to join. And women also have the option to get a background check badge next to their profile as well, if they go through that process. So everyone has that availability to them. And so, on the left, you can see sort of what that process looks like. As a guy is going through onboarding Hulah, he would either get a code, or he can also go through this background check. So we actually paired this with Checker Trust, and then we use our current existing technology where other apps right now, you might have noticed they have, to make sure they're not a catfish. So they use like biometric data. We built a ID verification. So we verify the name, likeness, gender, all those things, and are able to make sure that the name that they input on the background check is the same as their ID. And we work with all that together along with the photos on their profile, and they go through the background check, and once they get approved, the guy gets in, and he can always add an endorser later as well. So that's sort of how we leverage this technology while staying by our mission of making things safe. And as I mentioned, we do take a more aggressive approach on the categories that we accept pass or fail. And we also take into account the years as well. So those are some things that we look at as far as being inclusive at Hulah. And yeah, online dating can be really scary. So we just believe in providing really the best, most safe foundation for users. And we really try to go the extra mile compared to other spaces you might find on the internet.
That's fantastic. I love the way that it's so seamlessly integrated into the platform. And Kevin, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, Heather, I really like the fact that there's some gamification involved with these badges, where oftentimes when it comes to trust and safety, a lot of companies see it as a stick, or almost like a penalty or a piece of friction or a hurdle. But on the flip side, if you can gamify it where, and this can work for, I think, Sittercity too, where you can get badges for extra background checks, or like the number of, maybe not dates you've gone on, but there's ratings and reviews, if you will. And if you get a certain amount, you get this extra badge, and that promotes additional trust on that platform. You're not digging the folks that have less ratings, but if someone has really engaged really well on the platform, reward them for it and gamify it. And I've seen that work out really, really well for other different, for other marketplaces as well. So really on the Sift perspective side, really our core mission is to help everyone trust the internet. That's not just my team's goal, that's my company's mission and kind of what we're here to do. It's a bit grand and nuanced, but that's what we believe in, and that's what we're trying to provide for all businesses out there. To do that, how we do that is really, number one, to enable businesses to build systems that are trust and safety by design, and having that capability is critical. Knowing at the end of the day, as the internet is growing and maturing, hey, we're not going to be able to have an internal human check every piece of content, check every profile that's onboarding to our platform. And so how do we scale that, and how do we make it more automated, and at the same time test for false positives to make sure that our models aren't biased? Are we sampling enough internally? Are we working cross-functionally with our legal teams and our customer success teams to make sure that, yeah, our models are tuned up where we want it to be, knowing that it's never going to be perfect, and that's why you frankly have that escalation process. So really, when some issue kind of hits the fan here and it creates either a PR issue or a community issue, what's the playbook that we want to run to kind of keep things in check? And at the end of the day, when you look at, let's say, your quarterly objectives and key results or your goals, are we within our thresholds and our tolerances in those levels, knowing that, hey, we're never going to be perfect all the time. As far as key takeaways, number one, I think especially for, let's say, dating apps and platforms like Sittercity, like, trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. And I know that's harder to quantify sometimes, especially if you're looking for additional resources. But I think about someone, let's say on a dating site, where if they have a bad interaction with someone, yes, it's just one interaction, but the churn and the kind of the repercussions of that negative experience, because let's say you're dealing with a fake profile or something like that, there's a lot downstream. And so I've definitely looked at customer lifetime value of folks that have interacted with an account that we didn't want them to interact with. And inevitably, the ROI of those users, those good users that interacted, unfortunately, with, let's say, a bad account, is much, much lower. The engagement rate is also much lower. So there is kind of a business dollars and cents piece of the equation that you can measure. The other one is frankly around kind of the speed, scale, and sophistication of fraudsters or kind of bad actors is increasing. And I know it's sub 1% of the population that is nefarious and trying to do bad things. Unfortunately, and yes, I know all the rage these days is around AI this and AI that, but the fact of the matter is these tools are more readily available now and easier to access. And as a result, those things can pop up on our platforms and create a disproportionate amount of badness there. And so what companies can do, so what are things that companies can do to set themselves up to kind of mitigate against those risks? And certainly I think that starts with investing in systems that can scale, that can learn. Really, that's frankly table stakes at this point in order to scale and grow an effective community. And I know today we talked a lot around background checks and those things. Certainly they are a pivotal piece, but I tend to approach it a bit more holistically as well, where you can look at other aspects of a profile, whether it's their location, device information. I think Heather mentioned some of this stuff as well, where when you're onboarding a new customer or a user, certainly your background checks are a piece of it. But even just, I think Monday I was reading that AT&T, they disclosed a data breach where 72 million or so of their clients or former customers, their name, email, social security numbers, like pretty sensitive pieces of information, were leaked or posted on the dark web. And now that information can be used for things like signing up for different programs and communities. And so what are the things that businesses can do to look at background checks, of course, but those other pieces of signals that the person or the user is dropping along the way, and then creating some similarities there to take action on, hey, if we think we do have a bad actor, they might not just come in as one account. If we correctly decline them, if they really want to get on the platform, what are we going to do to detect account number 2 or 3 or 4? So that's becoming more and more critical for businesses.
Fantastic. Thanks for highlighting this. And to your point, there's so many different layers and ways that companies should be thinking about their holistic trust and safety measures. And there's a lot of different angles to really come out with this. So let's move on. We're going to run a quick poll, but to move forward from there, let us briefly cover a little bit more about the checker trust safety screenings. So our safety screenings, as compared to traditional background checks, are really a more cost-effective, instantaneous, and highly customizable solution to make sure we're screening for the most relevant crimes, considering your unique community guidelines and user base. We're really talking tens of cents and a really instantaneous process that can come back in seconds, unlike a traditional background check. Our team partners with companies who are interested in our criminal data products to consult on their problems, really helping to organize where you are in your user journey with criminal data signals, what can play the biggest role, and what can add the most value. And of course, we're excited to connect further and really talk through some of these holistic solutions, considering where safety screenings can play a role, but really just to consult and understand each business's unique challenges as it comes to designing a safety product and designing a great user experience for their community. So I think we're coming up pretty close to time. And so with that, I will do a quick Q&A, just a wrap-up question for each of our speakers. Of course, today I'm really happy that we were able to dive into the framework of safety and inclusion and how we think about that. I think there was a great discussion around different aspects to thinking about designing fairness and inclusion, and thinking about mission and values, building policies, and assessing and adapting, as well as some challenges. And I think everyone highlighted some really great examples. So we talked a lot about what we've been doing and what different platforms have been enacting. But as a wrap-up question, I'd like to hear from the speakers is, looking forward, where do you see your company or product in the future with regards to safety and inclusion?
I keep forgetting to unmute. So for us, we really are cementing ourselves as the safest dating app for women, filled with better guys. So really, it's going to be leaning into that, including, even expanding globally and using those same practices globally as well.
And then
For
from
us,
the Sift end, oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry, Kevin. I was just going to say for us, I think we're on a really good path forward. I am no longer the only person bringing up these types of topics. They're becoming more rooted in our discussions with all of the teams, product, tech, design, marketing, everybody, which is really enlightening to see as I continue growing here. And we really know it's important to keep a mindset of understanding how things that we are doing or thinking about doing can cause such great impact, and cross-functionally really try to think of many perspectives when we're discussing initiatives when it comes to inclusivity.
And then from my end, really, when it comes to trust and safety and kind of all that encompasses, including kind of the fairness and inclusivity, it's at the core of what we do. The difficult thing that I see for a lot of businesses is the execution of that vision and of that mission. It gets difficult, and it gets more difficult, especially as new threats emerge, whether it's new data breaches or just as the internet frankly matures and different types of marketplace models come up. The fact that we can stay in a stranger's home, I can hire a stranger, vetted of course, to take care of my child. These are all great things that frankly didn't exist several years ago, and now people don't think twice about it. That ecosystem, though, does take a lot to maintain, and frankly, it's still growing, and new types of marketplaces and new engagements are being spun up. And so I really approach it from more of the technology standpoint. How are we scaling to adapt to these new threats? How are we scaling and enabling consumers to engage more heavily on our platforms and do it in a way that is safe at the end of the day, and of course allows the company and the platform to grow and thrive. And there's no straight right answer, like where does trust and safety fit in, and how critical or how much do we want to kind of put our fingerprint or our impression on that user experience. And at the end of the day, look, when it comes to taking action on the platform, especially when it comes to removing someone, it's a small fraction of a fraction, but we've got to build in the kind of layers to detect it. And then when needed, yeah, we can absolutely take action on that sub kind of piece of the population. But kind of keeping up with those new trends is certainly something that keeps me up at night, and certainly what we're building the product to do for current use cases and future ones that pop up.
Fantastic. It's so amazing to hear how everyone is really continuing to look forward, and how fundamental these principles of fairness and inclusion are to each of these different businesses. So it's been fantastic to hear from everyone, and a great discussion today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Martina to wrap up.
Thank you, Nice. And thank you everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, please check out marketplacerisk.com to access this recording along with past recordings, and to subscribe to our email newsletter to stay up to date on all events and happenings. I hope everyone has a great day, and we look forward to seeing you at a future event. Bye-bye, everyone.